So Nico Iamaleava's got the keys. It is his team. How will he stack up with some former UT quarterbacks in year number one when they got the keys? Some of UT greats. Projecting what Nico will do compared to the likes of Peyton Manning, Joshua Dobbs, Eric Ainge, some others. That and more at your Thursday Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome into it, your Thursday edition of Locked On Vols. I am your host, Eric Kane. Can't thank you enough for being here, making Locked On Vols your first listen each and every day. Shout out to everydayers for making this show what it is. And shout out to FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can make every moment more by visiting FanDuel Sportsbook. Put in that promo code Locked On to get started, where you can win $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet over at FanDuel Sportsbook. I got a fun show coming up today. Again, Nico Iamaleava projecting what he could be year one with the keys of this Tennessee offense compared to some other Tennessee quarterbacks in the past in year one. And then we're going to speak with Andrew Lyon of Locked On Gamecocks. We're going to kind of do a State of the Union of where Tennessee is and where South Carolina is entering year four with their respective head coaches. If you remember way back when, it was Josh Heupel and Shane Beamer that both were the co-recipients of the first-year head coach award, Steve Spurrier first-year head coach award winner, whatever that thing is. And so, though South Carolina and Tennessee aren't playing this year, I kind of want to get a little State of the Union there. And, of course, we got Andrew to talk about look ahead to Tennessee at baseball and South Carolina this weekend. So, a fun conversation coming up with Andrew Lyon of Locked On Gamecocks. But first, what are your projections for Nico Iamaleava? I think the sky's the limit, obviously. I think that expectations are through the roof. And, I mean, that's comes with the territory. You're, the number one overall quarterback and, you're number one overall player in the, your class. And here we go. Yeah, you're the number one overall player in your class, you're number one overall player in the country, top quarterback, 5-star, all that, rumored to be a, high dollar NIL guy. And so it comes with the territory, right? But I did want to compare kind of what Hendon did in year one in the system. What recent Tennessee quarterbacks and some of the greats did in year one. And you got to keep in mind, the game has changed, offensive has changed, and of course, Josh Heupel's offense is different from anybody else. So some of these stats will look a little bit different. But Hendon Hooker in year one with Josh Heupel, he completed 68% of his passes, threw for 2,945 yards. Okay, he had 31 passing touchdowns and 3 interceptions. It's a really, really good season. Just a fantastic season. He almost duplicated all that in year two. He threw for more yards, 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 69% completion percentage. Hendon Hooker, obviously I'm not breaking any news, was really, really good. But that first year when he kind of came over and took over midway through the game number 2 of the season, he went off. And it'd be great to see Nico kind of do the same thing. Different system, different coach, all that, but Jared Garantano as a not a true freshman, he kind of took over towards the end of the season, but as a full-fledged starting quarterback for Tennessee, not very good, obviously, certainly not up to Hendon Hooker's praise. 62% completion percentage, threw for 1,907 yards. He had 12 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Okay, so at the time that was a decent little leg to start on, to stand on, but the numbers really didn't improve as you moved on out, and ultimately his completion percentage kind of went down the further you went. Of course, his interceptions went up. Jerry Garantano in 2019, goodness gracious, 16 touchdowns and 16 interceptions. What about Joshua Dobbs? As a true freshman quarterback, or at least the first year that he was the starter no matter what, let's go 2015, because of course he played in 2014 a little bit. Let's go 2015. No, let's go 2013. Yeah, 2013. He split a little bit of time, but let's go 2013. Josh Dobbs, as a true freshman, completed 59% of his passes, but it was the next year when he kind of took over, completed 63% of his passes, 12 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Of course, Dobbs is a unique character because he also ran, but threw for just over 1,500 yards. I certainly think Nico Iamaleava can put up better numbers in year one, albeit a redshirt freshman year, than maybe that of Josh Dobbs when he was getting his opening act. Tyler Bray, one of my buddies pointed out to me his final 5 or 6 games when he was a true freshman when he took over was really, really good back in that 2010 season when he took over for Matt Sims. 18 touchdowns, 10 interceptions on only 224 passing attempts. He threw for over 1,800 yards in limited time. And, of course, Tyler Bray went off when he was a full-fledged starter. 17 touchdowns and 6 interceptions in 2011, and 34 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, over 3,600 yards passing in 2012. But his first year, those stats are very obtainable. Let's go back to Eric Ainge. Let's go to 2005, because that's when Eric Ainge truly had the keys to the Ferrari, right? He split time a little bit with Brent Schaefer. Rick Clausen was around there. But in 2005, that was Ainge's down year. 5-7, 737 yards passing, and of course, completing only 45% of his passes. He was hurt that year, only had 145 attempts. But Nico can certainly outdo that. His freshman year was much, much better. In 2004, when he threw for 17 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, still the completion percentage was not very high. Casey Clausen, as a freshman in 2000, taking over for A.J. Suggs. Not that A.J. Suggs. Completed 62% of his passes, had 15 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, threw for just over 1,400 yards. Nico can certainly do more than that. Again, Nico will be a redshirt freshman. Peyton Manning as a freshman in 94. And of course, we know Peyton Manning wasn't a starter his entire freshman season. But he took over, ended up throwing for 11 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He threw for 1,141 yards. What about his sophomore year when he was 100% the starter for Tennessee in 95? In 95, of course, we know Tennessee won a lot of games, 22 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 2,954 yards. I think stat-wise, Nico can certainly outdo that this year in 2024. Jeff Francis in 86, 9 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Andy Kelly in 89, 7 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Heath Schuler in 92, 10 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Tony Robinson in 84, 14 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Jimmy Streeter in 77, 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and so on and so forth. My point is, in all this discussion here, and we can get lost in numbers, and I know that you probably got lost in a lot of the numbers that I threw out there. My point is, Nico Iamaleava has an opportunity to stand out amongst first-year starting quarterbacks for Tennessee. Look at the stats. Outside of Hendon Hooker, who he was a veteran in college, but a first year in the system back in 2021, that's going to be an outlier. We'll see if Hendon can get close to we'll see if Nico can get close to what Hendon did in 2021 when he threw for 31 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, completed 68%, and had 9.72 yards per attempt. We'll see if Nico can be more comparable to that of what Josh Dobbs did his first year starting, to what Tyler Bray did towards the end of his true freshman season when he took over for Matt Sims. What Eric Ainge did, he'll surpass what Ainge did in 2005. He better. But what Ainge did in 2004 when he was splitting time as a true freshman, 17 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, nearly 1,500 yards passing. All these are so attainable. And of course, again, offenses have changed. Tennessee's not an air raid, contrary to what people who don't follow or watch Tennessee football offense will make assumptions. Tennessee's not an air raid, but you will have more opportunities than a lot of these guys. And I think it'll be interesting to kind of go back whenever Nico's done with 2024, see that stat line, and kind of go back and see, okay, well, where does this compare to Hendon Hooker? Where does this compare to some of the greats like Peyton Manning? Some of the guys who played a lot as true freshmen like Eric Ainge, who took over early on in their career like Josh Dobbs, Tyler Bray. It'll be interesting. Casey Clausen as well. Again, Casey Clausen, 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, taking over in 2000. That should be a pretty that's a marker that we can look back on. But I think Nico will far and away surpass any of these guys' stats and will be more in line with what Hendon Hooker did in 2021. I don't know. Maybe this was a dumb segment, but I thought it would be interesting to kind of go back and look at some previous Tennessee quarterbacks and what they did in year 1 as the starting quarterback, because I think Nico Iamaleava has an opportunity to blow so many of these stats just out the water. And if he does that, Tennessee's probably winning games, and Tennessee's pushing for a spot in the college football playoffs. So will be interesting. Let's revisit this. I'm going to save this Excel file, but shout out Bill Martin over at UT Athletics for sending it to me. A lot of good information here on quarterbacks year-by-year stats, and I think Nico, at least compared with the first year that they started, has a big-time opportunity to make some noise, and hopefully win a whole lot of games for the University of Tennessee. Hey, Andrew Lyon of Locked On Gamecocks will join us next. We'll talk Tennessee and South Carolina football, expectations for Beamer and Heupel in year 4 at the helm, all that and more. That is coming up next, and then we'll get into baseball talk in segment number 3 as we continue on here with a Thursday edition of Locked On Vols. It's winner take all time in the NBA, the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. You guys know on weekends during NASCAR season, I love to put a little coin in my pocket, play so many of the different props in the NASCAR races. That is fun for me. You can do it for golf, playoff basketball, playoff hockey, Major League Baseball is in full swing right now. Go Atlanta Braves, little 2-game sweep with the Chicago Cubs. I love it. But all that and more you can find at FanDuel.com. Put in that promo code LOCKEDON where you can make every playoff shot count and get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, it is America's #1 sports book. Andrew, it didn't feel that long ago when it was at the conclusion of the 2021 football season. Josh Heupel and Shane Beamer were both named joint, first-year head coach of the year, Steve Spurrier, whatever award that was, coming off successful seasons. And, of course, we go on and, South Carolina has done some things, Tennessee's done some things. But entering year 4 for both Josh Heupel and Shane Beamer, kind of a state of the union a little bit. What is South Carolina looking like entering year 4 under Beamer, and kind of what's maybe the approval rating amongst, the riders and, of course, the fan base for Shane Beamer?
Yeah, well, Eric, I think it's safe to say that heading into year 4, South Carolina is a little bit of a mystery team. First couple years that Shane Beamer was here in Columbia, I think it's fair to say South Carolina well outperformed the expectations that the regional and national media space had set on them. Year 1, Beamer takes South Carolina to, I believe, the Duke's Mayo Bowl, beat North Carolina, gets dumped in a bunch of mayo, going 7-6. A lot of people thought they would only win maybe 4 games that year. Year 2, they go to the Outback Bowl, and they play a game against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, bringing a lot of ratings. Fantastic game down there in Jacksonville. And then year 3, things kind of went off the rails a little bit. South Carolina going 5-7, missing out on a bowl game for the first time in the Shane Beamer tenure. And so this was sort of an off-season, Eric, where Shane Beamer, some changes had to be made and some things had to be addressed. So South Carolina, they made several coaching changes, 3 new assistant coaches on the offensive side of the ball. Defensive coordinator Clayton White's coming back for his 4th year. At one point in year 3, Eric, it looked like he was probably going to get fired. But South Carolina made a change to a 3-3-5 defensive scheme in the last month of the regular season this past year. Seemed to work out really well for them. So now they're changing up the defense. They're going to run a nickel set, but also the 3-3-5 along with that as sort of a flex defensive scheme. So some changes made schematically, some changes made on the coaching staff. And the one thing that Beamer still got going for him right now, he's recruiting quite well, brought in his 2nd straight top 20 recruiting class out of the high school ranks, and also led a top 10 transfer portal class, according to the folks over at On3 Sports. So they're bringing in the players, and now it's year 4. You're bringing new coaches. So the expectation now is, Shane, you got to get back to the postseason. You got to go at least 6-6, and you got to get things back on track because at South Carolina, in this new era of the transfer portal, you probably cannot have a 2nd straight down year. Now, looking at Josh Heupel, Eric, I know that, of course, 2 years ago it was basically a magical run for Tennessee, going all the way to the Orange Bowl and winning a game against the Clemson Tigers, which Gamecock fans I know appreciate quite well. But this past year, things sort of seemed to take a step back a little bit for the Volunteers. Was that sort of maybe the expectation, or are Volunteer fans now having high expectations once again that Tennessee should be a double-digit win team under Josh Heupel with what we've seen so far?
Well, I'm going to stop you right there. One of the last things you said, Tennessee fans having high expectations again. I mean, in the 15 years where Tennessee was just a dumpster fire before Heupel, and of course there was a couple years there that was fun with Butch, and really dating back to Philip Fulmer, I mean, the expectations have never left. Tennessee should win, 10, 11 games every single year according to this fan base. But that's fair, right? And especially coming off that year 2 you referenced, Tennessee won, 10 wins in the regular season. Of course, had a chance to, go to the college football playoff potentially. We all know what happened in Columbia, South Carolina. That was just an abysmal performance. But that was a great year. And so this past year, it was a step back. And you look at everything that you lost. I mean, it's college football. There's attrition every single year. You lost Hendon Hooker. You lost Darnell Wright, who was a top 10 pick on the offensive line. You lost Jalen Hyatt, who was Blitnikoff Award winner. I mean, you lost a lot, sure. But, Hendon Hooker kind of accelerated this rebuild, if you will. And Joe Milton's not a horrific quarterback, contrary to what fans want to say. He's just not Hendon Hooker. He's just not elite. And I truly believe Hendon Hooker was an elite quarterback. And partly because you lost some explosiveness at the playmaking positions at wide receiver, partially because it's Joe Milton at quarterback. I mean, the offense took a major step back, still scoring, I think, 31 points a game, but far from the 46 and leading the nation, right? So it just looked a whole lot different. But again, going back to that expectations talk, for Tennessee fans, frustrated, unacceptable, and that's 8-4. And so many years, and 8-4 should not be the expectation, but so many years with Tennessee, preseason talk, summer talk, it's like, 8-4. I think you get 8-4. That'd be a great year, 8-4. And this was just a horrible year, and Tennessee finished 8-4 in the regular season. So I think that goes to show you how well of a job Josh Heupel and his staff has done here in 3 years. And of course, like you mentioned, the expectation's only going to continue to grow. So I look at the schedule, man, for 24. And of course, I think Tennessee can win double-digit wins and all that. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but it's different. You welcome in Oklahoma, you welcome in Texas. The divisions are no more, no East, no West. And because of that, Tennessee is not playing South Carolina this year. A little interesting, a little bit different. What is one game on the schedule, though, for South Carolina that Shane Beamer has got to get this year? Or, maybe it could be the difference between a winning and a losing season, maybe bowl eligibility not, maybe 8-9, whatever it is, or fans will really start to say, okay, well, we might need to make a change.
Right. Well, to get into this conversation, Eric, when you look at South Carolina's schedule, I think that they've got 4 gimmies. They've got games against teams like Old Dominion, Akron, Vanderbilt, which South Carolina's actually not lost to since, I believe, 2008, and Wofford. So those 4 games right there, Carolina fans are like, okay, you could chalk those games up. You got to find 2 more. And you look at the schedule for South Carolina, it's not going to be easy. You got to play at Kentucky in week 2. First SEC game of the entire football season. You got LSU the following week at home. You got a brutal October stretch against Ole Miss at home, at Alabama, and at Oklahoma. And then the final 5-game stretch, it's Texas A&M at home, at Vandy, Missouri, Wofford, and then at Clemson, of course, their arch rivals. The one game I think Eric South Carolina has got to win is Texas A&M. That might stray away from what some other people might say, but I think that you look at the schedule, I feel like South Carolina is going to split the Kentucky LSU games at the beginning of the season. I easily could see them going 0-3 in October against Ole Miss, Alabama, and Oklahoma. So we look at that. That would put you at, say, 3-4? Yeah, 3-4. So coming out of your second bye week, right before the Texas A&M game, it's at home. I think it would be very important for the Gamecocks to regain some momentum, get yourself to 500. Then you got games at Vanderbilt and then Missouri, Wofford, and Clemson. If you win that Texas A&M game, I think it's basically a shoo-in. You're probably going to a bowl game as long as you split the Kentucky LSU game. So you need one thing to happen there. But if you lose to Mike Elko, a guy that, granted, has head coaching experience and knows the SEC a lot better than most first-year SEC head coaches, if you lose that game, if you're Shane Beamer in your 4th season, and let's say maybe you don't defeat either Kentucky or LSU, it's going to get really loud in Columbia. So with that being said, Eric, looking at Tennessee's schedule, what's the one game that you think Josh Heupel needs to win?
So real quick before I give you that answer, is it fair to say, and again, I cover Tennessee, so I know the SEC, but for South Carolina specifically, the offseason talk is, hey, you got to be bowl eligible. You got to get 7 wins. You got to get is that fair?
Oh, yeah. No,
what's that line from FanDuel for South Carolina?
It's currently 5.5. That's the win total over under set by them.
Okay.
So,
okay. Yep. That's kind of what I thought. So the line for Tennessee was at 8.5, and so the question is, can Tennessee go on a run, win a couple games, and get into that 12-team college football playoff? That's kind of been the talk of the offseason and will continue to be the talk of the offseason. So in order to do that, there's a couple of games on that schedule, obviously, that are so very important. I mean, it's an SEC schedule. It's a little bit different, but it's still tough. There's not many days off. Tennessee goes on the road to begin SEC play in week 4 at Oklahoma. It's almost like the schedule makers knew what they were doing, right? Josh Heupel, SEC opener, going home.
No coincidence at all, right?
Yeah, no coincidence. Bob Stoops is going to be lurking on the side. I mean, it's going to have all the theatrics. You get off. Then you go back on the road to Arkansas, at home against Florida. And this Tennessee team should have no business losing to that Florida team. However, it's just one of those series in the SEC to where Tennessee just finds a way to lose. So that could be in consideration for Florida, because this Tennessee team has no business losing to that Florida team. At home for the third Saturday in October against Alabama, that's always huge. Later in the season, you're going to Georgia. So there's a lot of contenders here. I would probably say, and this is kind of going back to the football player and me, the coach talk, probably at Oklahoma. And this isn't Josh Heupel's going to lose his job, far from it. But if you go on the road, week 4 of the season, to begin SEC play, and you drop that game to Oklahoma, it's going to be a tough environment in Norman and all that, all the storylines we talked about. Pretty good team. They're going to be a top 25 team for sure, top 20 team. I got a young quarterback, much like Nico Iamaleava here at Tennessee. But to start SEC play, that's a tough challenge. It's on the road. And if you drop that game, albeit on the road to Norman, I mean, what type of confidence do you have in your team to beat Alabama at home, to go on the road and give Georgia a run for its money? I think that game is huge. I think it's monumental at the beginning of the SEC slate for Tennessee if you want to reach your goals of double-digit wins and, of course, pushing for a spot in the college football playoffs. So I will go for Oklahoma here in that one. Overall, here's we kind of bring this this conversation to a close. Again, Tennessee and South Carolina are not really playing this year, but I thought it'd be fun to kind of talk some football. Overall vibe of the offseason for South Carolina. You think it's been good, bad, still some work to do? What's the offseason been like?
Cautiously optimistic. I know that that's a phrase that sometimes gets used too much in this sport, but I think that South Carolina fans, they look at the team, they look at the makeup. I think that they see improvement on the horizon, but the fan base is also in wait and see mode because obviously of what happened last year here in Columbia.
Yep, no doubt about it. And of course, Tennessee's offseason, it's been pretty fun. I think Tennessee had a nice transfer portal cycle. I think Tennessee had a good spring practice with a lot of hype around, of course, Nico and Tennessee's defensive line. And again, we could say this about every fan base in America, but you find reasons to talk yourself into like, oh, man, this guy's going to be really good. This team's going to be really good. So that's the beautiful thing about the offseason. So Tennessee and South Carolina do not play in 24. However, 2 head coaches entering their 4th seasons. We'll see kind of the trajectory of each program with Tennessee and South Carolina. It should be fun to watch. Tennessee baseball will welcome South Carolina to Lindsey Nelson Stadium this weekend. It'll be a top 25 matchup. Andrew will get us set for that when we return here on Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Vols. All right, Andrew Lyon for Locked On Gamecocks, Eric Kane, Locked On Vols. Big top 25 showdown here at Lindsey Nelson Stadium this weekend to conclude the regular season. 2 teams kind of in different spots. Andrew, I want to say this time last week, South Carolina was 13th in the land. Dropped a series in sweeping fashion to Georgia, who's hotter than a hiccup right now. And you're at 24 now, 13 SEC wins. You need one more SEC win to truly feel like, okay, we're safe, right? We're safe. So I don't want to say South Carolina's desperate, but South Carolina, needs to get another win for sure. What's the mindset kind of coming in for South Carolina this weekend? Of course, knowing the challenges that lay ahead. Number 1 Tennessee on the road.
I think South Carolina's in wounded animal mode, Eric. I think that's the best way I can put it. Last weekend in a series where, like you said, South Carolina, they got swept by the Georgia Bulldogs. And that was a series where a lot of people looked at it and say, hey, whoever wins that regional, you probably just locked up a regional host spot. And it's very disappointing for South Carolina fans to see that a head coach who's in his 7th year here in Columbia loses that kind of series in his home ballpark to a coach that's in year 1 in Wes Johnson over at Georgia. And Georgia, quite honestly, controlled that series from the very first inning onward. And so South Carolina, they're licking their wounds right now, I should say. And, they're going up against arguably one of the best teams in the entire country, the Tennessee Volunteers. And, Tennessee, I know you're fighting for an SEC regular season title, going up against Kentucky and a couple other teams up there in a very stacked league right now. So it's not going to get any easier for South Carolina. But if there's one aspect of this series that could go their favor, hey, maybe Tennessee overlooks them just a little bit. They're looking at the hardware that they could get. And again, your backs are against the wall. That's when teams can be the most dangerous. But Eric, to be honest with you, with what I've seen from South Carolina on the road this season, I don't know if I should expect things to be all that much different this weekend. They've struggled away from their home ballpark. And that's the case for most teams, but especially for South Carolina, they've just been a roller coaster throughout this entire season. It's really the best way I can put it.
Yeah, getting ready to go to Vanderbilt last weekend, doing my preview, doing my baseball podcast and everything, I was looking at the splits, and man, Vanderbilt's a classic example. And you're right, it's like that for a lot of teams in this league, but because it's so difficult to win on the road. But Vanderbilt was so good at home. And then I think their record prior to last, of course, it didn't change because they were at home. Their record was like 3-10 on the road. I'm like, man, that is staggering for a team like Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. For Tennessee, it's certainly I have not this whole year. I've never gotten the impression that they have been a team to take anybody lightly. I mean, there's games where you just don't have it. Like Game 3 at Vanderbilt, Tennessee won games 1 and 2. Game 3 just didn't have it. They were held to 3 hits on the day, and Dylan Dreiling got all 3 of them. So Tennessee was no hit outside of Dylan Dreiling and shut out. I mean, that just hasn't happened for this type of offense. So I'll be intrigued to see. They're trying to just take it one game at a time. This league is so funny because Tennessee's number 1 in the country in all the polls, right? They're number 2 in the SEC East. They trail Kentucky, as is Arkansas, by a game in the SEC standings. And they're projected, depending on where you look, as the 3 or the 4 overall national seed. So it just goes to show you that, the polls every single week don't matter a whole lot. But anyway, Tennessee's a good ball club. They won 8 straight series. What I can tell you about Tennessee's pitching is Tennessee's employed very much an opener role this year, because you had a couple of years where it's just like, all right, you got Burns, you got Dolander, you got Beam. You know what you're getting. And you had Tidwell in that mix. You had a couple Lindsey in that mix last year. You had a couple other guys as well. But this year's a little bit different. It's really been about Tony Vitello and Frank Anderson trying to piece together 27 outs in a ball game. And so on Thursday night, Chris Stamlos will get the ball and he'll go for 2 innings or 3 innings and try to get 6-9 outs, and then he'll hand the ball to AJ Causey. AJ Causey will go the distance after there if he stays clean. On Friday in Game 2, Drew Beam will be the traditional starter for Tennessee. He's that stable force there. And then on Sunday, it's been Xander Seacrest doing a little bit of the same thing, about 2 to 3 innings, and then you hand it over to Nate Snead. But Nate Snead also can come in and, just like he did last weekend, and slam the door shut in Game 2. So it's been piecing it together pitching-wise for Tennessee. What about South Carolina? I noticed that for the most part, through the beginning of SEC play, they ran with the same rotation on the weekend. But here lately, it's been mixed up a little bit. It looks like Eli Jones has gone back to Game 2. Looks like South Carolina took its best reliever in Garrett Gainey and put him in the rotation and pitched really well last weekend. Kind of where's South Carolina at in the rotation?
Yeah, Eric, it's been a revolving door. I got a quick stat here for you and all the Volunteer fans listening to this right now. Up until this past Saturday's game against the Georgia Bulldogs, final game of that series, the previous 5 games, South Carolina's starting pitcher did not make it past the 4th inning. It has been that bad. And that includes 3 games, by the way, against a bottom feeder in the Missouri Tigers.
Wow.
Yeah. The situation with South Carolina's pitching staff has not been good, needless to say. Eli Jones, I would say he is the best pitcher overall out of the entire staff that has a bevy of starting experience, but he has sort of been off kilter the past few weeks. So they've been working hard with him, trying to see if they can figure out something that's wrong with him mechanically this week, according to Mark Kingston. If I had to make a guess in the rotation, I would probably say Jones, day 1 or day 2. Ty Good will take the other spot, and Garrett Gainey will take Game 3. Gainey showed a lot this past weekend. His first start since he got to Columbia, had starting experience at Liberty. They tried to keep him in the bullpen as long as they could here, but they got to a point where they just said, we got to use our best arms. Gainey's one of the best arms. He's got a lot of ride on his fastball, even though it's not maybe going to be mid-high 90s, and he's got a couple of breaking balls to go with that as well. So it's not going to be a lot of overpowering stuff for South Carolina's pitching staff, not really velocity-based, more so control-based, trying to locate pitches in the corners and the edges of the strike zone, try to keep you off balance that way. So those are probably going to be their top 3 guys. After that, it's just a mess. South Carolina just has to hope that those guys can stay in the game long enough and they score enough runs to where they can put the pressure on Tennessee maybe in the back third of these ball games. That's going to be the formula for them winning this series.
So you look at Ty Good, has he made? I see he's got 2 starts on the season. Have they been in SEC play?
I do not believe either one's been an SEC play. Okay. South Carolina was using an opener in Roman Kimball for the last 3-4 weeks, and Ty Good was kind of the guy that came in after him. The thing is, though, Roman Kimball came in last 2 innings. I mean, he's just blown up the last 3-4 weeks, and last week was probably rock bottom for him. So it would not shock me at all if the staff at this point in the season just says, Ty Good starting the game right out the gate. So that's what I think is going to happen.
It's very similar to Tennessee. You know, A.J. Causey was in that piggyback role to begin the season. A.J. Russell goes down, who maybe you'll see a little bit at some point this weekend, but it'll be in a minor role as he works himself back from injury. Tennessee's opening day starter. But A.J. Causey, came in, and then, of course, he stepped in place of Russell and did so well. And then he got blew up for a couple of weeks in SEC play, put him back in the piggyback role, and he's been fantastic. So, he'll take the ball from Stamos in inning 2 or 3 and just go as long as he can. Nate Snead as well. I mean, you look at Tennessee's stats on the season stats PDF, and Causey and Snead are right up there in innings pitched and strikeouts and all that, but not as many starts. Well, it doesn't matter if you start the game, it's how long you go. And so I think there's some similarities a little bit, albeit not as many maybe inconsistencies and injuries on Tennessee's side to where South Carolina is. Tennessee's offense, as we kind of conclude this conversation, Tennessee's offense been a little sporadic here the last, I'll say, 3 series. Still one of the best offenses in the league, one of the best offenses in the country, and still has shown their hand. They scored a combined 15 runs in 2 games at Vanderbilt. The first 2 games, they scored 11 runs in 1 inning against Florida 2 weeks ago. They hit 6 home runs in a game 1 against Missouri 3 weeks ago. I mean, the point is they've still shown up. But it's a team that's been kind of going through it a little bit here lately. But you got 5 guys, double-digit home runs. You've got the bulk of its everyday players hitting over 300. In fact, only 2 of the everyday players are hitting under 300. It's a really, really good offense. Semo, Christian Moore, you got to watch out for him at the top. Billy Amick hitting 3rd. Kavares Teer, Blake Burke hitting 2nd. I mean, the list goes on and on. You look at South Carolina, some names that you see, year after year. Ethan Petrie is there again. Cole Messina. Looks like both those guys have done pretty well. Parker Nolan making his way over from Vanderbilt last year. Who's kind of been the straw that stirred the drink offensively for South Carolina?
I would say that in terms of consistency, when he's on, it's Cole Messina. Last weekend was a very bad series for him, but the week prior against Missouri, he was SEC Player of the Week. So if Messina is on, he can hurt you real bad. Ethan Petrie, I mean, he's so good that it just takes one swing of the bat for him, and he can change a ball game entirely. Yeah. So those 2 obviously come off the top of my head. Third guy I'll name out for you, Eric, is Kennedy Jones. The thing with Kennedy is there's times where he's a bit hesitant when he's at the plate, but when he's aggressive, swinging early in the count, he seems to just be a lot better, and he's gotten better as the season has gone on, transferred from UNC Greensboro. So keep an eye out on him. If those 3 guys can get going for South Carolina and the pitching staff can just hold off Tennessee's batting lineup enough, then again, they could make it a series. But with it being on the road in Tennessee's ballpark, again, I still think that's going to be hard to accomplish this weekend.
Blake Jackson, is he hurt right now? Looks like he hadn't played in about 2 weeks.
He is not hurt. Now, he's been hit a lot, so if Tennessee hits him a couple times, then who knows? Maybe he won't be able to go the rest of the weekend. But, no, Jackson, yeah, he'll be good to go. He's gotten better as the season's gone on as well. More of a speed guy. So infield grounders, he can be safe at first. So you got to be able to get him when you can.
And again, I haven't dove down into it, SEC stats only and all that, but just looking at the season stats sheet, I mean, he's hitting 310. Looks like he's done pretty well, right? But then I looked, and it looks like he hasn't maybe played the last couple of weeks. Maybe I'm off there. But anyway, Blake Jackson was another name that kind of stood out to me when I was doing some research.
Mm-hmm.
All right, man. Well, looking forward to this weekend. We'll see what happens. Number 1, Tennessee, hosting number 24, South Carolina. South Carolina, again, very much needing a win to solidify postseason fate, get to that lucky number 14. Of course, you got the SEC tournament as well. What's your prediction, Andrew, for this weekend in Knoxville, Tennessee, and South Carolina?
I say South Carolina goes 0-3. I think Tennessee sweeps, and I think South Carolina goes into Hoover limping, and historically, they don't do well in the SEC tournament, so you could tell by what I'm saying, Eric, yeah, the feelings are down right now in Columbia, but who knows? Again, maybe they steal one, feeling like their backs are against the wall here. They
having flashbacks to October of 2020, or no, whenever it was in 2022, when Tennessee football was favored by like 21 points, and you're like, oh my gosh, Tennessee's going to cover. I'm like, Tennessee's going to cover, and we all know how that ended. I'll take Tennessee to win 2-1. Tennessee's got a couple sweeps on the year, but they've won a ton of series in 2-1 fashion. Pretty much every way you can do it, dropping the opener, winning the last two, taking the first two, dropping the last game, sandwiching a loss around a couple of wins, some rubber matches. I'll take Tennessee to win its 9th straight weekend series and take down South Carolina 2-1. Andrew, appreciate it as always, man. Good talk on South Carolina football and previewing what's to come, a look ahead of what's to come for Tennessee and South Carolina baseball this weekend.
Absolutely, Eric. I appreciate you having me on as always.